I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? I am who I am.
If the one who spoke to Moses has already written your tomorrow, if the voice from the whirlwind called your name, if time itself bows before him, what would that mean for you, my friends? If these moments stir something deep inside, take a second to like this video and subscribe to Verse in Wisdom so more hearts can hear these words. Thank you for walking with us. May your days be filled with light, with peace, and with the strength to stand in awe before the Eternal One. Now, let us step into the desert, hear the voice from the storm, and open the scroll. To begin, the night was silent, yet alive. Stars blazed like ancient embers scattered across a vast, unending sky. Beneath them stood a lone traveler, a man wrapped in a weathered cloak, the dust of many roads clinging to his sandals. His eyes searched the heavens, as if they might give him the answer he had carried in his heart for years. Then it came, not from the earth, not from the stars. A voice deep, steady, older than time spoke into the marrow of his soul. If I created all things, who created me? He froze. His breath caught. It was the question no man had ever answered, the question whispered in the chambers of kings, debated in the halls of scholars, and prayed in the silence of prophets. From the palaces of Solomon to the wilderness of Sinai, from the ink of ancient scrolls to the hearts of the searching, it had traveled through centuries, fusing to fade. In that moment, the traveler was no longer alone. The desert around him shifted, and before his eyes, three figures emerged from the pages of time. First, an old shepherd, barefoot on holy ground. His staff trembled in his hand, his eyes wide before a bush that burned but was not consumed. Moses. The mountain wind carried the scent of fire, yet the flames did not scorch. And from that fire came the name no man could invent. I am who I am. Then a man clothed in ashes, kneeling on cracked earth beneath a sky split by storm. Job. His voice rose not in defiance, but in the raw ache of one who had lost all. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? The whirlwind roared behind him, its sound a reminder that there are questions meant not for answers, but for surrender. Last, an old exile, the sea wind tearing at his tunic, standing on the jagged rocks of Patmos. John. His gaze pierced a sky, unfolding into visions. Galaxies spun like wheels of fire, and a voice rolled like thunder over the waters. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. The traveler's knees weakened. He felt as though the ground itself had become unsteady, as if he stood not on sand, but on the edge of eternity. The question returned sharper now, like a blade drawn in silence. If God has no beginning, how can we, bound by beginnings and endings, ever understand him? He turned to speak, but the words would not come. The prophet's eyes met his Moses with the weight of command, Job with the humility of dust, John with the fire of vision. None gave an answer. None explained. Instead, their silence became the voice, and the voice became the truth. Some questions are not bridges to knowledge, but doors to worship. The stars above seemed closer now, as if leaning in to listen. The traveler's heartbeat slowed, and with it came a strange peace. He knew the journey ahead would not yield a tidy explanation, but something far greater, the unveiling of the Eternal One. He took a step forward. The sand shifted underfoot. Somewhere, far off, the sound of the burning bush mingled with the cry of the whirlwind and the echo of the Alpha and the Omega. And in that chorus of eternity, a thought rose in his heart, the thought that would guide him into the depths of the story. If we could find the answer, would faith still be faith? The wind rose without warning. It began as a whisper through the dust, then grew into a howl that shook the air. The traveler lifted his head, and there before him knelt a man in torn linen, his skin pale beneath the ash. His eyes were hollow yet unbroken. This was Job, the man who had lost everything: children, wealth, health, yet refused to curse the name of the Lord. Around him the ground cracked and split, and behind him a whirlwind towered into the heavens, its spiraling heart alive with lightning. The air itself seemed to bend under its weight. Then, from within the storm, a voice not like thunder, but deeper, a voice that made the bones tremble and the heart bow. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" The traveler felt the words pass through him, not around him. It was not a question seeking an answer. It was a question stripping away the illusion of control. Job's lips parted, but no reply came. His head lowered as if the dust beneath him was holier than gold. The storm shifted, and suddenly the traveler saw what Job saw. He was no longer in the desert. He stood at the edge of nothing, no stars, no ground, no sound, just absence, and then a breath. Light unfurled like a banner across a black void. Oceans rolled where there had been only emptiness. Mountains rose like the bones of the earth breaking through its skin. The sun blazed into being, spilling warmth across newborn seas. Time had not yet begun. Yet something eternal was moving. This was before clocks, before calendars, before the first heartbeat, and in the center of it all, not a spark becoming a flame, but a flame without origin, the presence of the one who is. The traveler's knees gave way. He felt the scale of it press against his mind until it hurt to see. Beside him, Job was weeping not for his losses, but for the realization that the Creator needed no defense, no explanation. That he was not simply the beginning of all things, he was beyond beginnings. The voice came again, softer now, yet still filling every breath of air. It spoke not to belittle, but to remind there is a distance between heaven and earth that no wisdom of man can cross. That some truths are too vast for reason and must be carried by faith alone. The light dimmed, the mountains faded, the roar of creation ebbed into the whisper of desert wind. The traveler was back where he had started, standing in the dust. The whirlwind gone, the sky clear once more. Job was gone too, but his voice lingered, carried on the air like a memory. Some questions are not given to be answered, but to humble the proud heart. The traveler stood still for a long moment. The sand shifted around his feet, warm beneath the fading sun. In the quiet, he understood the search for God's origin was not a path to an explanation, but an altar where the mind must kneel before the infinite. Far on the horizon, a glimmer of fire, a bush burning without being consumed, flickered and vanished. The traveler's breath steadied. He knew the journey was far from over. There were other voices to hear, other visions to see. And so he walked on, toward the next revelation. The path narrowed until it vanished into shadow. The traveler paused, unsure if this was still Earth or someplace beyond it. The air was still, yet thick as though it carried the weight of ages. A faint glow pulsed ahead, drawing him onward. There, in the half-light, stood a man draped in a simple linen robe. His beard was black, streaked with silver, his eyes clear, yet piercing. This was Isaiah the prophet, who had seen the Lord high and exalted the train of his robe filling the temple. Isaiah's voice was steady, but it carried a gravity that pressed on the heart. Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first, and I am the last. Apart from me, there is no God. The words did not echo. They seemed to absorb all other sound. The traveler swallowed hard. He wanted to ask the question that had burned since the night under the stars, but Isaiah spoke first. "You seek the cause," the prophet said, "because in your world every fire has a spark. Every river has a spring. But the one who is has neither. He is the fire without beginning, the river without source." The air around them shimmered, and the traveler's mind filled with images. He saw chains of causes stretching backward through history, every stone laid by another hand, every life born of another life. But then, at the end of that chain, there was no link. Only light, pure, unmade, self-existent. Isaiah stepped closer. "To measure eternity with a clock," he said, "is like trying to cup the ocean in your bare hands. You are searching for the starting point of the one who has no starting point." The traveler felt a strange ache, part wonder, part frustration. "But how can I believe in something I cannot trace to its beginning?" he asked. Isaiah's gaze softened. "Because you stand upon it," he replied. "You are breathing it. The very fact that you seek him is proof of his being. For without him there is nothing to seek." The light brightened until it erased the shadows around them. In that glow, the traveler felt time loosen its grip. Seconds no longer marched forward, they simply were. He realized that beginnings and endings were tools useful to the created, meaningless to the Creator. And then he understood the question was not, "Who made God?" but "Who sustains me even now?" The prophet's form began to fade into the brilliance. His voice lingered woven into the light. "The one who is needs no cause. He is the cause." The brilliance dimmed. The traveler found himself once more in the desert, the sand cool beneath his feet. But something had changed. He no longer felt the same hunger to find a beginning for God. Instead, he felt the pull to know him as he is. On the horizon, a flicker of fire hinted at the next step of the journey. Somewhere ahead lay the voice from the burning bush, the name that no man could invent. The traveler began to walk each step carrying the weight of a new truth. You cannot trace the origin of the origin himself. The mountain rose before him, jagged, ancient, its slopes carved by the hands of wind and time. The traveler's steps slowed. Something in the air had changed. The wind carried a scent, not of sand or stone, but of fire. Then he saw it. At the base of a ridge among the thorn and dust, a bush burned. Flames wrapped its branches, danced along its leaves, yet nothing was consumed. The fire was alive, and its light reached farther than its size should allow. A man stood before it. Sandals removed feet pressed into the earth. His robe was worn from years in the wilderness. His face weathered by sun and solitude, but his eyes held both fear and reverence. Moses. The traveler stopped a few paces away. He knew this was holy ground. The air itself seemed to lean in, waiting. Then the voice. It came not from the fire, nor from the man, but from everywhere at once. "I am who I am." The words were not merely heard, they were felt in the bones, in the breath. They were not a name given for identification, but a declaration of nature. This was not "I was as if bound to the past." Not "I will be as if waiting on the future." But "I am the unchanging presence, the self-existent one." Moses' knees bent. His hands trembled as though holding something unseen yet infinitely heavy. The traveler felt the same weight press upon him. In that moment, he understood God was not offering an explanation. He was revealing himself. To know "I am" was to stand before the source of all that is. The scene shifted. The traveler saw another figure in a crowded temple courtyard centuries later. Dust swirled as a man in simple robes stood among scholars and priests. His eyes were steady, his voice calm, but carrying a force that silenced the crowd. Before Abraham was, "I am." It was the same voice, the same presence, the same unshakable reality. Gasps rippled through the listeners. Some recoiled, others clenched their fists, but a few their eyes widened, as though they too had heard the echo of Sinai in those words. The traveler's mind raced. The one speaking to Moses in fire was the same one now standing in flesh and blood. The Eternal had stepped into time not to redefine himself, but to reveal himself more fully. The vision folded back into the mountain. The burning bush still blazed, the air still glowed. Moses looked up as if aware of the traveler's thoughts. His voice was low reverent. This is the name that is not bound to time, the name that holds all time within it. The flames seemed to lean forward, their light brushing against the traveler's face. In that glow, a question rose in his heart, uninvited yet undeniable. If the one who says I am stood before me now, what would I dare to ask him? The thought lingered like the warmth of the fire. The traveler took a slow step back, not out of fear, but in awe. He knew the journey was drawing him deeper into mysteries that would not only challenge his mind, but reshape his life. Behind him, the desert stretched wide. Ahead, the path wound toward a horizon where time itself would bend, and the Eternal One would show that he is not just the God of beginnings, but the Lord over time itself. And so, with the echo of I am still burning in his ears, the traveler turned toward the next vision. The air grew thin, yet strangely weightless. The traveler stepped forward and found himself in a place without sky, without ground, without horizon. There was no sun to mark the day, no moon to soften the night, for there was no day, no night. Only a vast stillness, as if the universe had not yet begun to breathe. From that stillness, a figure emerged. His robe flowed like liquid sand grains of gold and silver, sliding endlessly down invisible slopes. His face was ageless, neither young nor old, but his eyes reflected the turning of every age. This was the Keeper of Time. You have walked into the space before? The first second, the Keeper said, his voice, deep, steady, like the toll of a bell that had been ringing forever. Here there is no before and no after. There is only the one who is. The traveler's brow furrowed. If there is no time, then what is this place? It is not a place, the Keeper replied, but the absence of places. The silence before the first note, the canvas before the first stroke. Here you begin to understand why the Eternal One cannot be measured. A slow gesture of the Keeper's hand brought a vision into the air between them, a clock vast as the sky, its hands frozen. Around it, countless smaller clocks hung, each ticking at its own rhythm. All this, he said, was made by him. Time is his creation. He does not live within it. He holds it. The traveler reached toward the great clock. It was warm as though pulsing with life. Then he whispered, God was... Before this, long before the Keeper answered, before the timeline of galaxies, before the heartbeat of atoms, before Genesis itself, the words of Scripture seemed to rise from the still air. God gave us grace in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. 1:9. The traveler realized time did not contain God. God contained time. The vision shifted. He saw the opening words of creation written in light. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. That beginning was not God's beginning. It was ours. The start of our story. Our seasons, our hours. The Keeper stepped closer, his robe whispering like the fall of endless sand. He stands outside the clock, he said, yet every hand moves because of him. He sees the first moment and the last as one. To him, the end is not waiting, it is already known. The traveler felt a strange trembling in his chest. If this was true, then every fear of the unknown future was a shadow cast by his own smallness, not by God's uncertainty. The Eternal One was not waiting to see what would happen. He had already woven the outcome before the first second was born. The Keeper's eyes locked on his. So tell me, he said quietly, if the Creator is not bound by time, when do you think his plan for you was completed? The question sank deep, pulling the traveler into silence. He had no answer, and yet somehow the answer was already alive in him. Around them, the frozen great clock began to tick. Slowly at first, then steady, its hands moving as though set free. The keeper stepped back into the shimmering stillness. "This is not the end of your understanding," he said. "Only the doorway." The traveler blinked, and the strange weightlessness was gone. He was standing on a wind-swept plain, the sun-low shadows stretching. Somewhere ahead, the path led to the dwelling place of the Eternal. The wind carried a sound, not a song, not a voice, but something between the two. The traveler followed it until the path rose to a ridge, and there, stretching across the horizon, stood a gate. It was vast, its surface smooth as glass, yet etched with a single word that seemed to shine from within eternity. The gate had no hinges, no locks. As the traveler stepped closer, the light around it shifted, not like sunrise or sunset, but like something that had never known either. The brightness was steady, eternal, untouched by shadow. From the heart of that light, a figure emerged. His form was clothed in a robe woven of white fire, and his face shone as though lit from within. His eyes held no reflection of passing days. They were deep, unchanging, infinite. This was the guardian of eternity. "You have come to the dwelling of the high and exalted one." The guardian said, his voice both thunder and whisper. "The one who lives forever, whose name is holy." The traveler's mind recalled the words of the prophet Isaiah. "Birds live in a high and holy place, but also with the one who is contrite and lowly in spirit." Isaiah 57:15. It was not only that God's home was eternal. His presence reached into the humblest hearts. "What does it mean," the traveler asked, "to live in eternity?" The guardian's gaze deepened. "It means there is no was and no will be. All that you call past, present, and future he beholds as one. For him 1,000 years are as a day, and a day as 1,000 years. Every moment is before him as now." He raised a hand, and the air between them became a pool of living images. The traveler saw the creation of the stars, the crossing of the Red Sea, the rise and fall of empires, the beating heart of his own birth, all side by side as though happening together. "This is why he does not change," the guardian continued. "Time corrodes all it touches, but it cannot touch him. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever." The traveler reached toward the swirling visions, but they did not move. It was as if they were frozen in a single breath. So he whispered, "When he sees my life, he sees it all." The guardian nodded. Every choice, every word, every silent prayer. He knows the end from the beginning, not because he predicts, but because he is already there. The truth struck the traveler harder than any wind. If God had already seen the full tapestry of his life, then nothing was hidden, nothing unexpected. Every unanswered question was not a gap in God's knowledge, but a part of a story already whole. The guardian's voice softened. "Tell me, traveler, if you knew the author saw your entire journey at once, how would you live today?" The question lingered like light on the skin seeping deep. The traveler could not answer, yet he felt the weight of the choice pressing closer. Behind the guardian, the gate of eternity opened not outward, but to inward, as though folding the traveler into itself. Beyond, there was no road, no sky, only a radiance that seemed to breathe. "This is the threshold," the guardian said. "Beyond here, you will learn not only that he is eternal, but that his nature never shifts." The traveler stepped forward, feeling the light wrap around him like a cloak. The gate closed without a sound, and the world beyond was already changing. The traveler stepped through the light of eternity and found himself in a vast hall carved of stone older than mountains. Pillars rose like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces etched with lines of gold. At the center stood a single pillar, broader than a tree, its face engraved with words that glowed faintly, "I do not change." A man stood beside it, robed in deep blue, his hair white as frost, yet his eyes sharp as the morning. In his hands he held a scroll that seemed to have no end, rolling off the pillar, winding across the floor, vanishing into the shadows. This was the keeper of the record, the one who guarded every word the Eternal had ever spoken. "You've crossed into the chamber of constancy," The keeper said, his voice warm yet unyielding. Here lies the truth that steadies the soul. The one who was before time is the same now and forever. The traveler ran his hand over the glowing words. They were warm, alive, as if pulsing with a heartbeat. But everything changes, he murmured. The world shifts, people fade, even mountains crumble. Everything you see changes, the keeper replied. The seas trade their shores, the stars trade their places. Empires rise and sink into dust, but he, the keeper, tapped the pillar. He is the same. The words of the prophet Malachi seem to breathe through the air. I, the Lord, do not change. So you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. Malachi chapter 3:6. The keeper unrolled the scroll a little further, revealing another line in fresh ink as though it had been written just now. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:8. The traveler's voice lowered. So his promises? Unbroken, the keeper answered. Unchanged. The same mercy that covered the sinner in the desert covers you now. The same power that parted seas can part your darkness. The same faithfulness that held the saints will hold you. The keeper gestured toward a pool of water in the center of the floor. The surface shimmered, reflecting not just the traveler's face, but scenes from ages past. Abraham counting stars, David in the wilderness, a weeping Peter restored by the shore. Each figure was met by the same unchanging gaze of God. Do you see? The keeper asked. Different eras, different trials, yet the same God. His heart does not drift. His love does not fade. His justice does not bend. The traveler stared into the pool, realizing that the God who had walked with them walked with him, not a shadow of who he was, but exactly the same. The keeper's voice softened, though the weight of it remained. So tell me, traveler, if he has never changed, what could you trust about him right now? The question landed with quiet force. The traveler felt his own doubts rise and crumble. Perhaps the answer was not a list of things to trust, but a person who had proved himself through all ages. The keeper rolled the scroll back with a practiced motion. This truth, he said, is not meant to sit in your mind like stone. It is meant to be the ground you walk on. The traveler looked once more at the glowing words on the pillar. They seemed to shine a little brighter now, as if the truth they declared had found a place in him. Hold to this, the keeper said, stepping aside toward a doorway carved in shadow. For ahead, you will see what his unchanging nature means for your own fragile faith. The traveler moved toward the doorway. The air beyond felt different, closer, more personal. He knew the path ahead would bring the truth of God's constancy into the most intimate corners of his own heart. The traveler stepped through the shadowed doorway and found himself in a smaller room. Its ceiling low, the air warm with the scent of cedar and parchment. Every wall was covered with slips of paper, each bearing a promise written in a careful hand. Some were old and yellowed, others fresh as if inked that very morning. Together they formed a tapestry of faith. At the far end sat a woman, her hair silver, her hands steady though lined with years. She looked up from the parchment she was writing and smiled. Welcome, she said, her voice like the low hum of a hearth fire. You've come to the room where his promises live. The traveler stepped closer, reading some of the words on the wall. I will never leave you, nor forsake you. My grace is sufficient for you. Each one was a verse he had heard before, yet here they seemed alive, as if breathing. You've learned, he does not change, the woman said, setting down her pen. But that truth is not meant to float above your life. It is meant to anchor you when the seas rise. Her hand reached for a length of rope coiled on the table. Think of this, she said, looping it in her fingers. A ship in calm waters may drift without worry, but in the storm it throws its anchor deep. God's unchanging nature is that anchor. You tie your soul to it, and though the waves beat and the wind tears you hold. The traveler thought of his own storms, nights of unanswered prayers, days when faith seemed like dry ground. But what if, he asked, I've tied my hope to something I thought was his will, and it doesn't happen." The woman's eyes softened. "Then you remember this? His nature does not shift. If he has promised, he will do it, though not always in the way or time you imagine. His timing is as perfect as his character." Her gaze lifted toward the wall to a verse written in bold letters. "Your word, O Lord, is eternal. It stands firm in the heavens. Your faithfulness continues through all generations." Psalm 119, 89-90. "These words have held the hearts of the faithful for centuries," she said. "They will hold you too." She rose and took down one of the slips of paper, handing it to the traveler. It read, "I will fight for you. You need only to be still." A woman I knew, she continued, clung to that promise for years as she prayed for her son. He wandered far deeper into darkness than she could reach. But one day, without warning, he came home. His heart turned, his chains gone. She saw then that God had been fighting all along. The traveler held the slip, feeling the weight of it in his palm. "So, every promise here has been kept." "Everyone," she said without hesitation. "Not one has failed. Some took decades. Some came in a form no one expected. But all came. Because he does not change." The traveler's eyes moved across the walls again. These were not just words. They were histories, testimonies, battles one faith proved. "Then why," he asked quietly, "do we still hesitate to trust him?" The woman gave a gentle smile. "Because we are changeable. We forget. But that is why we keep the promises before us, to remind our shifting hearts of his steady one." She took the slip from his hand and placed it in the pocket over his heart. "Carry this. Not as a charm, but as a reminder. When the winds rise again, let it draw you back to the anchor." The traveler felt the truth of it settle in him. This was more than knowledge, it was a lifeline. The unchanging God was not distant. He was a rock beneath his feet, a rope in his hands. The woman stepped aside, revealing another doorway, this one draped in deep blue cloth. "Beyond," she said, "you will hear of the promises that do not end." The traveler bowed his head in thanks and stepped forward, ready to walk into the next chapter of the Eternal's story. The traveler pushed aside the blue cloth and stepped out into a vast expanse. The air was cool, fragrant with pine, and above him the night sky spread wider than thought could measure. Stars spilled across the darkness, each one burning with steady light. On a rise stood a tall figure cloaked in silver gray, a staff in his hand tipped with crystal. His eyes reflected the heavens as if he carried them within. "Welcome," the figure said, voice low and resonant. "I am the watcher of stars. I keep vigil over the promises that never fade." The traveler climbed the rise, his boots pressing into soft moss. "These stars," he began. "They are the promises," the watcher replied. "Some are near their light, warm on your face. Others were spoken long before you, and their fulfillment has not yet reached you. Yet all remain as sure as the day they were given." The watcher pointed to a bright star low on the horizon. "That light left its home 1,000 years ago. Tonight it touches your eyes. So it is with his promises spoken in one age, fulfilled in another. But time cannot erase them." The wind shifted, carrying words like a whisper from ancient scrolls. "God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should change his mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill?" Numbers 23:19. The traveler tilted his head back, letting the stars fill his vision. "But what of the ones I have not yet seen fulfilled?" he asked. The watcher's gaze did not waver. "You hold them as the sailor holds the chart. You walk toward them as the pilgrim walks toward the dawn. Every yes of God is already certain in Christ, even if the path to it winds through shadow." The words of the apostle rang clear in the air, for no matter how many promises God has made, they are yes in Christ. 2 Corinthians 1:20. They walked together to the edge of the rise, where the land fell away into a valley veiled in mist. Below, the traveler could see faint glimmers, campfires, lanterns, reflections of starlight on water. Those lights, the watcher said, are the lives of those who have held to his word. Some waited a season, some a lifetime. Yet when the promise came, it was perfect. The traveler's heart tightened. Then his promises are not bound to my lifetime. They are bound to his faithfulness, the Watcher said. Your part is to believe, to live as one who knows the light will arrive. You may not see every star rise, but you can trust the one who set them in their courses. They stood in silence for a time, the sky stretching above like an open scroll. The traveler felt the weight of his own questions and the strange peace that came when they rested in someone greater than answers. The Watcher leaned on his staff. Tell me, traveler, if he has never broken a promise, what would you dare to trust him for now? The question settled into the traveler's mind like a seed. What if faith was not clinging to what he could see, but to what was certain, though unseen? The Watcher turned and began walking toward a narrow path that led down into the mist. The next place, he said, will show you what happens when the promise meets the trial. Many lose heart there, but those who remember the stars endure. The traveler followed, glancing back once at the sky. The stars seemed closer now, their light steadier. It was as if they had drawn nearer in answer to his gaze, or perhaps he thought he had drawn nearer to them. The path into the valley was narrow, the mist curling low and cool around the traveler's ankles. Somewhere ahead, a river murmured over stones, its voice calm yet constant. As he descended, the glow of the stars dimmed behind the veil of fog. At last he came to a rope bridge stretched across a deep gorge. The wooden planks swayed gently and the cables hummed in the wind. At the far side stood a man in a weathered coat, hands resting on the ropes, eyes fixed on the traveler. I am the keeper of the bridge, the man said as the traveler approached. His voice carried the firmness of someone who had watched many cross and some turn back. This is the place where promises are tested. The traveler stepped onto the first plank, feeling it shift beneath his weight. Tested, he asked. The keeper nodded toward the opposite bank. When you cannot see the end, when the wind shakes you, when the fog hides the far side, that is when you discover whether you trust the promise or only the path. The bridge creaked as the traveler took another step. The drop below was hidden in the mist, but he could feel the emptiness waiting there. And if I falter? Then you remember, the keeper said, tightening his grip on the rope, that the one who gave the promise also built the bridge. It will hold. His words echoed the ancient call, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. Hebrews 10:23. They paused halfway across. The wind rose, making the ropes shudder and the planks knock together. The traveler felt his heart beat faster. Has anyone turned back from here? He asked. Many, the keeper said. Not because the bridge failed, but because their hearts did. They let the shaking speak louder than the promise. The traveler's mind flickered to Abraham, who had waited decades for the son God promised. Year after year passed, the body grew older. The promise seemed more distant, yet he did not turn back. When Isaac came, it was not only a child in his arms, but the proof that God's word had stood against time. The keeper's gaze was steady. I once knew a woman who prayed for her village during a long drought. The land cracked, the wells dried, the children grew thin. People told her to stop. The rains were gone for good, but she kept her jar ready. One morning, before the sun rose, she woke to the sound of drops on her roof. The rains had returned sudden and full, and every jar in the village overflowed. The traveler felt the sway of the bridge, the strain of the ropes, and the truth of the stories settle in his chest. So the trial is not proof the promise has failed. It is proof the promise matters, the keeper said. No one tests what is worthless. They moved on, plank by plank, until the far bank grew clearer. The fog thinned, revealing a path that climbed toward light. The traveler felt the tension in the rope's ease as his boots touched solid ground. The keeper smiled faintly. The bridge will always sway, but the anchor points never move. The traveler looked back once, seeing the bridge suspended in the mist, a narrow line between what was promised and what was seen. If the trial cannot shake the promise, he asked softly, what is it that shakes us? That, the keeper said, is the question you must carry upward. The traveler nodded, turning toward the path ahead. Somewhere above, beyond the mist, was the place where the faithful see with their own eyes what they once held only in hope. The traveler climbed out of the mist and into a world awash with morning light. The first rays of the sun spilled over the ridges, painting the rocks with gold. Dew clung to the grass, each drop catching the dawn like a tiny gem. On a flat stone ahead sat an old man wrapped in a cloak the color of warm earth. His hands rested on a carved staff, and beside him lay a pile of smooth river stones, each marked with symbols. His eyes bright and deep lifted to meet the travelers. "I am the story keeper," he said. His voice was rich, as if it carried the weight of many remembered days. "I gather the stones of fulfilled promises." The traveler approached, curiosity stirred. "These stones, what are they for?" "They are memorials," the story keeper replied, picking one up and turning it in his palm. "Each marks a promise kept a moment when his faithfulness could be touched and seen." He gestured toward the horizon where a river wound through the valley below. "When our people crossed the Jordan, the waters stopped for us. Joshua commanded that 12 stones be taken from the riverbed and set up where we camped, so that when our children asked, 'What do these stones mean?' we could tell them the story of the Lord's hand." Joshua 4. The traveler's gaze followed the river. "So the memory keeps the promise alive. It keeps faith alive," the story keeper corrected gently. "The fulfilled promise is not only for those who received it, but for those who will hear of it later." He set the stone down, the soft thud sounding like a heartbeat against the earth. The wind stirred, carrying a verse that seemed to linger in the air. "The Lord is faithful to all his promises and loving toward all he has made." Psalm 145:13. The words seemed to settle into the traveler's bones. The story keeper leaned forward. "Tell me, what has he done for you that you have not told?" The traveler thought of moments, small rescues, quiet provisions, answers that had come in the last hour. He had carried them in his heart, but had spoken of them rarely. "You see," the story keeper continued, "when you speak of his faithfulness, you are setting a stone where others can see it. Someday someone may stand where you stood, wondering if the promise will hold, and your stone will remind them." He handed the traveler a blank stone from the pile. It was cool and smooth, its surface waiting. "Take this. When you reach the next place of rest, mark it with the memory of what he has done for you here. Keep it where you can see it." The traveler turned the stone in his hand. It felt heavier than its size, as if it carried more than just its own weight. "And if I forget," the story keeper smiled, a line of sunlight touching his face, "then you come back and look again." The stones do not forget. They sat together in the warmth of the new day, the stones piled between them like a quiet testimony. The traveler realized that while the stars spoke of promises yet to come, these stones spoke of promises already kept, and both were needed for the journey. The story keeper stood leaning on his staff. "You will meet others who need your story. Share it. Build their faith as yours has been built." As the traveler rose to continue, he glanced back. The story keeper was already seated again, lifting another stone from the pile, tracing its carved lines with care. The image fixed itself in the traveler's mind, a keeper of memories, ensuring that the faithfulness of God would not be lost in the haze of time. The path ahead curved toward a ridge, bathed in light. The traveler tightened his grip on the stone, feeling its weight anchor him to what was true. Somewhere up ahead there would be someone who needed to hear the story it carried. The traveler followed the path until dusk began to press in and the air cooled with the promise of night. Ahead, a faint orange glow flickered against the trees. He stepped into a clearing where a small group huddled around a campfire, their faces drawn shadows deep beneath their eyes. One of them, a woman with dust on her cheeks, looked up. "Are you coming from the bridge?" she asked, her voice heavy. "I am the traveler," said, settling on a nearby log. "Why do you ask?" The woman glanced at the others. "We've been waiting for something promised. It's been so long, and we're not sure we can wait much longer." Her words hung in the cool air, fragile as the smoke curling toward the stars. The traveler reached into his pack and drew out the smooth stone the story keeper had given him. The firelight caught its surface, making it shine. "May I tell you a story?" he asked. They nodded, leaning closer. He spoke of the bridge in the mist, the keeper who had steadied him, and the truth that the one who gave the promise had also built the way across. He told them about the story keeper and the river stones, each one a witness to God's faithfulness. He shared moments from his own journey when help had come at the last possible moment, when the promise had seemed lost but was not. As he spoke, the fire's glow seemed to reach further into the darkness. The faces around him softened. The tension in their shoulders eased. "This stone," he said, holding it up, "is a reminder, not just for me, but for anyone who needs to know. He is faithful. You may not see the end yet, but the promise still stands." A man across the fire asked quietly, "Do you truly believe that?" The traveler met his gaze. "I do. Not because I've never felt the weight of waiting, but because I've seen the one who promises bring his word to pass." The woman who had spoken first leaned forward. We needed to hear that tonight." The traveler smiled faintly. "We overcome not just by holding the promise, but by speaking of what he has done. Revelation says they triumphed by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." Revelation 12:11. Your story, the one you've lived, even the parts still unfinished, can be the reason someone else doesn't give up. Silence fell, but it was not heavy now. It was a silence filled with embers of hope, the kind that smolders until it bursts into flame again. The traveler placed the stone between them on the ground. "Let this be our reminder tonight. And when you see someone faltering, tell them your story. You never know, it might be the bridge they need." The fire crackled softly, casting light into the faces of those gathered. In that clearing, with only the night and the flames as witness, faith began to stir again. The traveler rose, adjusting his pack. "Morning will come," he said, glancing toward the east, "and with it, the next step. Until then, keep the fire and keep the story." As he walked back into the shadows beyond the camp, he heard quiet voices beginning to share, one person telling another of a prayer answered, a burden lifted, a promise kept. The glow behind him seemed to grow brighter. Somewhere ahead was the season when what had been sown would finally be reaped. And he knew as he stepped into the dark that these stories would go with them, lighting the way until the harvest came. The first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, revealing a vast expanse of golden fields. The travelers stopped at the crest of a hill, breath catching at the sight. Stalks heavy with grain swayed gently in the morning breeze, their tips shimmering like liquid sunlight. Down among the rows stood a figure, broad-shouldered, wearing a linen tunic faded by many seasons. His hands held a curved sickle, its edge catching the light. He turned as the traveler approached, eyes warm but keen. "You've come far," the man said, voice carrying the steady tone of one accustomed to long labor. "And you've come at the right time." The traveler stepped into the furrow between rows. "Is this the harvest?" The man nodded, glancing over the expanse. "It is. But it did not happen in a day. Each stalk began as a seed buried in darkness. The rain came when it was needed, the sun when it was right. We waited, we tended, and now he lifted a handful of grain, letting it spill between his fingers. Now the promise stands in the open for all to see." The wind stirred, sending a ripple through the field like a wave of praise. The sound was soft but alive, as if the earth itself was singing. The man handed the traveler a sickle. "You've sown along your journey faith, hope, words of truth. Do not grow weary. As it is written, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Galatians 6:9. The traveler ran his fingers over the sickle's handle. "And if someone leaves before the season comes," the man's gaze was steady, "then they will not see the field as it is now. The seed was faithful to grow, but it needed the patience of the sower. This is why we wait, because the harvest is worth the days, the storms, and the silence." A pause settled between them, the kind that carries more than words. The traveler looked over the rows, seeing not just grain, but every step that had led here, the bridges crossed. The promises remembered, the stories shared. "What will you do," the man asked, "when your own field is ready? Will you gather it for yourself alone, or will you share the bread it will become?" The question lingered like the scent of the ripening grain. The traveler glanced at the horizon where the sun had fully risen, turning the field into a sea of gold. "I would share it, because the seed was never mine to begin with." The man's smile deepened. "Then you will find joy in the harvest, more than you expect." They walked together, the sickle glinting at the traveler's side. The field seemed endless, yet every row was a testimony to seasons endured and care given. The promise was not just in the reaping, it was in the proof that waiting had not been in vain. As they reached the far edge of the field, the man placed a hand on the traveler's shoulder. "The harvest will teach you something the planting never could, that the end of one season is the beginning of another." The traveler stepped forward, ready to begin, the golden stalks parting before him like a path into something both new and long-awaited. Somewhere beyond this day lay the sharing of the gathered grain, and the traveler knew the journey was far from over. But for now, the sickle was in his hand, the field before him, and the season had come. The traveler carried the first bundles of grain on his shoulder, the weight solid and warm against his back. The path wound down from the field into a valley where a small village lay nestled, smoke curling from chimneys, the scent of baking bread already on the air. As he entered, faces turned toward him. Some were lined with years of waiting, others carried the open-eyed wonder of youth. A few stepped forward hesitantly, as if unsure the harvest was truly here. "These," the traveler said, lowering the bundles to the ground, "are the first fruits of the season." An elderly man approached, fingers trembling as he touched the grain. "I have not seen a harvest in full for many years," he murmured. "Too often we planted but did not stay to reap." The traveler unwrapped a small cloth bundle from his pack. Inside were loaves of bread, their crusts golden, the steam rising in gentle curls. "This bread," he said, breaking one loaf open, "was made from last season's harvest. It is proof that the one who gives the seed will also give the bread." He offered pieces to the gathered crowd. The warmth of the bread spread through chilled hands, the scent wrapped around them like comfort itself. "As it is written," the traveler continued, "He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness." 2 Corinthians chapter 9:10. What we hold now is more than grain. It is the promise made visible. A mother lifted her child so he could see. "Is it sweet?" the boy asked, eyes fixed on the bread. The traveler smiled. "Taste and see." Laughter broke the quiet as the boy bit into the bread, his grin wide. The sound rolled through the crowd like a breeze stirring leaves. Hope, once faint, was rising again. The traveler moved among them, placing small sacks of grain into waiting hands. "Some of this is for now," he said, "and some is for planting again. Because the promise is not just for today, it's for every season to come." One young man held his sack close. "And if I give some away?" The traveler met his gaze. "Then you will be part of someone else's harvest." The seed was never meant to stay in one hand. He glanced around the square, the sunlight spilling over rooftops, catching on the grain, on the faces, on the rising smiles. "If you knew your harvest could feed the whole village," he asked, "would you keep it for yourself?" No one answered with words, but already some were tearing pieces of bread to share others, measuring out small handfuls of grain for neighbors. The traveler felt the weight of the moment, not the weight of the bundles he had carried, but the weight of a truth lived out. The harvest multiplies when it is given. Somewhere a child's laughter rang out clear and bright. It mingled with the sound of many voices, the hum of gratitude and the rustle of grain being poured from one hand to another. The village, once subdued, now pulsed with life. The traveler stepped back, watching the square fill with movement and joy. This was the reason for the long roads, the silent nights, the waiting, so that many could taste and see that the promise was real. Above the sky stretched wide and open, a reminder that the seasons turn, but the giver remains the same. And here in the heart of the village, the new season had already begun. The sun dipped low, spilling amber light across the rooftops. The traveler stood at the edge of the village, watching as people moved between homes, carrying grain, sharing bread, laughing under the fading sky. The air was thick with the scent of harvest, warm earth, fresh loaves, and something deeper hope rekindled. From here, the path back to the golden fields was visible, winding up the hill like a memory. He thought of the miles behind him, roads where the wind was the only voice, nights where doubt pressed hard, moments when the promise felt distant. Yet through it all, a steady whisper had remained. Keep walking. The season will come. A lantern was lit on the hilltop, its glow flickering against the growing dusk. To the traveler, it looked like more than flame. It was the light of a fulfilled promise, visible for all who would lift their eyes. He turned back to the village square. Children chased each other between baskets of grain. Elders sat in clusters, speaking in low tones, but smiling more than they had in years. The harvest had changed the air here. And yet he knew this was only the middle of the story. The harvest, he said quietly, almost to himself, is never the end. It is the sign that a new planting must begin. A voice beside him, the man with the sickle, nodded in agreement. As it is written, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Matthew 9:37-38. What you see here is the result of many seeds, but the next season waits. The traveler let the words sink in. All around, the evidence of the season's bounty was clear. But beyond the horizon lay other fields, still waiting, still empty of workers. He stepped forward into the square, drawing the attention of those gathered. Friends, he called, what we have seen today is not only for us. This bread, this grain, they are reminders that the giver's promise is for every field, every heart. Each of you holds seed in your hand. The question is, where will you let it fall? The crowd was quiet, listening. Somewhere a child's laughter echoed again, light and bright as the first star above. You may think your field is too small or your season too short. The traveler continued, but every harvest begins with one seed. Give what you have, plant where you can, and trust the one who gives the growth. Faces softened, some nodded slowly, others glanced at the sacks of grain at their feet. A truth was settling in, that the miracle was not just in the receiving, but in the giving forward. The traveler's gaze swept over them. I thank you for walking this part of the road with me, and I ask, keep walking. There are more fields to tend, more hearts to feed, more promises to see fulfilled. A hush lingered warm and full like the air before rain. May the one who began this work in you bring it to completion. May your fields be rich, your hands strong, and your hearts steadfast. And may you find joy not only in the harvest you gather, but in the seeds you sow for others. He smiled, then a smile carrying both rest and resolve. If this journey has stirred something in you, I ask you to carry it forward. Share the bread, share the seed, share the story. The crowd answered not with applause, but with action, hands passing bread, voices calling out offers, grain measured into waiting baskets. Above the lantern on the hill burned steady, its light reaching further than sight could measure. And in that glow, the traveler saw not an ending, but the opening lines of another season. Thank you for walking with us until the very last moment of today's journey. Every listen, every share from you is a seed planted in the field of hope. I promise in the next chapter we will venture even deeper to horizons where his promises continue to bloom. May the one who gives seed to the sower and bread for the hungry also grant you an abundant harvest within your soul. Keep your heart warm. Keep your hands ready, for a new season is drawing near. Until we meet again, in the place where the story never ends.